It's pitch black. Foggy English coast, 1700s. You're bent almost horizontal under two massive barrels of brandy, over 100 pounds strapped across your back like a wooden yoke. One wrong step in the marsh and you're drowning in 3 feet of mud. Somewhere behind you, armed revenue officers on horseback are actively hunting you. You're not a criminal. You're a fisherman. This is just Tuesday, and the wildest part? Half the village knows exactly where you are. The innkeeper down the road has already cleared space in his cellar. The lookout on the cliff is your neighbor's 16-year-old son. The local magistrate, the man technically responsible for stopping you, took a barrel of French brandy last month and hasn't asked any questions since. This is the story of the Tubmen and the Owlers, the most ingenious smuggling network 18th century England ever produced. And the system they built was so well designed, so deeply embedded into everyday life, that the British government spent decades trying to dismantle it and mostly just failed. To understand why this happened, you need to understand what British taxes looked like in the 1700s. And the short version is catastrophic. The government taxed everything, importing brandy, gin, tea, silk, tobacco. All of it carried duties so high that the final retail price could be 2, sometimes 3 times what the product actually cost to produce. Exporting wool was outright banned, a protectionist policy designed to keep English wool inside England and feed the domestic cloth industry, which sounds reasonable in theory. In practice, what it meant was that if you lived on the Kent or Sussex coast and you had access to boats, contacts in France, and a working knowledge of local marshland, you were sitting on an enormous, untapped, completely illegal business opportunity. Romney Marsh, the southeast coast, small fishing villages that had been scraping by for generations, suddenly had a decision to make. Keep playing by rules that were actively making their lives harder, or start building something else. They built something else. And within a few decades, whole communities had quietly reorganized themselves around a parallel economy. Fishermen became logistics coordinators. Farmers became cargo carriers. Innkeepers became warehouse operators. It wasn't chaos. It was infrastructure. It had roles. It had hierarchy. It had risk management. The British government wasn't dealing with a criminal underclass. They were dealing with an entire regional workforce that had collectively decided the law wasn't worth following. That's a fundamentally different problem to solve. The first group were called the Owlers. The name isn't poetic, it's operational. They worked exclusively at night and they used real owl calls as a live communication system. 1 hoot, safe to move. 2 hoots, stop everything, and hide. Their job was pushing exports out of England, specifically wool. Heavy, bulky, valuable wool that English merchants desperately wanted to sell to European buyers, and that the British government desperately did not want leaving the country. The Owlers loaded it onto pack horses or carried it themselves in massive sacks across Romney. Marsh, fog, hidden ditches, soft ground that could swallow a horse's leg if you hit it wrong, and delivered it to waiting ships anchored just offshore. The logistics alone are impressive. But what made the Owlers genuinely hard to stop was something that had nothing to do with the cargo. It was the community architecture around them. Inns along the routes had hidden rooms built into their walls, not improvised hiding spots. Purpose-built concealment, designed to be invisible to a casual search. Churches stored wool bales in their towers and crypts. Local farmers let their barns be used as staging points. The Owlers didn't need to outsmart the revenue officers on their own. They had a human network that made the entire operation essentially invisible from the outside. Revenue officers would ride into a village looking for evidence and find nothing. Not because the evidence wasn't there, it absolutely was, but because every person they asked had either no information or the wrong information. And there was no way to tell which. You can catch a smuggler. It's very hard to catch a village. But the Tubmen. This is where it gets genuinely clever. While the owlers specialized in pushing goods out, the tubmen were the import side of the operation. French ships, luggers, fast and low in the water, would anchor just beyond the surf line, loaded with brandy, gin, sometimes tea or silk. Small rowboats ferried the cargo from ship to shore, and then the tubmen took over. Everything about the tubman system was built around one specific container, the half-anchor tub, small, oval, wooden barrel, about 4 to 5 gallons capacity, sealed tight, unassuming. Here's the thing about a half-anchor tub on its own. It's awkward to carry. Round, heavy, no good grip points. One man hauling one barrel through a marsh in the dark is slow, loud, and exhausting, so they didn't carry one. They carried two. A wooden frame, simple, lightweight, held 2 tubs, roped together, one on each side, balanced across both shoulders like a yoke. The geometry of it is the whole trick. Instead of fighting the weight asymmetrically, you let it distribute. The load centers. Your hands stay free. You can move faster, quieter, and for longer without stopping. One tubman carrying a paired set was moving over 100 pounds of contraband brandy in the dark, across uneven marshland, in complete silence. And they did multiple runs in a single night. The genius here isn't complexity, it's simplicity. They looked at the problem. How do you move maximum cargo through difficult terrain with minimum detectability? And they solved it with a rope, a wooden frame, and basic physics, no special equipment, nothing that couldn't be built by a carpenter in a day. Everything optimized for the specific environment they were operating in. For a successful night's work, a tubman earned around 10 shillings. To put that in context, a farm laborer working legitimate daylight hours in the same region was earning considerably less for a full week. The risk was real, but so was the math. Here's the full operation, start to finish, because it's worth seeing. How all of it connected. A signal fires from shore, sometimes an owl call. The same system the owlers used, now repurposed for the import side, sometimes a shielded lantern, flashed in a specific pattern that the offshore ship's crew knew to look for. The signal means conditions are clear, come in now. Small rowboats push off from the French lugger and make for shore, low in the water under the weight of tub pairs. They beach quietly. The tubmen are already waiting, positioned in the darkness above the waterline. Loading is fast. Each tubman gets their frame set, tubs balanced, and moves. They travel in a loose chain, spread out enough that a single officer encounter doesn't catch everyone, close enough to pass whispered signals down the line. The route is pre-planned. They know every soft patch of ground, every ditch, every point where a horse and rider can't follow on foot. The destination is a safe house. Could be a church crypt. Stone walls, no windows, locked from the inside, and a reputation for sanctity that made revenue officers hesitant to force entry. Could be a cellar under an inn, could be a purpose-dug underground store on a farm, covered with a trapdoor and a layer of hay. But here's the part that stands out the most. What happens when something goes wrong mid-run? The tubmen didn't fight revenue officers. They didn't try to outrun them on open ground either, which would have been pointless. A loaded man on foot loses to a man on horseback every time on flat terrain. Instead, they sank the cargo. Pre-tied to a weighted stone, a tub pair could be dropped into a specific creek or channel in under 10 seconds. The tubmen marked these spots, not with anything visible, but memorized. A particular bend in a waterway, a specific distance from a known tree. Drop the tubs, scatter into the marsh on foot, where horses genuinely cannot follow, the ground is too soft and unpredictable, and disappear. 3 days later, when the area was clear, they came back, waded in, pulled the ropes, retrieved the cargo. The brandy was still sealed, still intact, still sellable. Water doesn't get into a properly sealed half-anchor tub. They knew this. It was part of the plan. That one detail, the willingness to leave the cargo and come back for it later, is what separates a smart operation from a desperate one. They weren't protecting the goods by fighting for them. They were protecting the goods by being patient. There's one more layer to this that's easy to overlook. The tubmen and owlers didn't succeed purely because of good logistics. They succeeded because corruption was load-bearing infrastructure. Revenue officers were chronically underpaid, operating in remote areas with no backup, facing communities that ranged from uncooperative to actively hostile. Some of them took bribes. Not occasionally, structurally. A barrel of French brandy left at a specific location was understood by both parties as a professional arrangement. The officer didn't ask questions. The tubmen moved freely. Everyone went home. Women were embedded throughout the operation, not as peripheral figures, but as active participants. They worked as lookouts, carried smaller loads, passed information through normal-looking daily activity that attracted no suspicion. A woman walking a coastal road at dusk looks like someone walking a coastal road at dusk. A man carrying a wooden frame with 2 barrels attached does not. Local magistrates, landowners, even occasional clergy had varying degrees of involvement or willful ignorance. The network wasn't hiding in the community. It was made of the community, which is ultimately why it lasted as long as it did. The government kept trying to fix it by catching individual smugglers. But individual smugglers were replaceable. The system underneath them, the relationships, the routes, the safe houses, the silent agreements, that was the actual thing. And that took a very long time to dismantle. A group of fishermen on a foggy coastline built a functioning parallel economy, using owl calls, wooden barrels, and a detailed knowledge of marsh terrain that their pursuers simply didn't have. They weren't master criminals. They were people who understood their environment better than the people trying to stop them, and who had the patience to build something durable instead of just reactive. The tub harness, the sink and retrieve, the village that collectively looked the other way. Pick whichever one impressed you most and leave it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which part lands. If you want the next smuggling story, you know what to do.